Thank you. Welcome everybody to the full authority meeting for February 10th for Kettle Creek Conservation Authority. Board members, staff, guests, and members of the public are reminded that the full authority board meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the authority's website along with the official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and the general public are their own and do not represent the opinions and or comments of the full authority and Kettle Creek Conservation Board of Directors. The recorded video of the authority meeting is not considered the official record of that meeting. The official record of the full authority meeting shall consist solely of the minutes approved by the full authority. I'll ask, is there any declarations of pecuniary interest in use thereof? Seeing none, welcome a motion for the minutes to be adopted for the full authority of January 20th.
I would so move.
Mr. Chair, just before, just before we get to that, can I do a roll call?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, Elizabeth.
That's okay. Dennis Krebitz.
Here.
Giguere.
Here.
Harvey.
Here.
Herbert.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Mackey.
Here.
Peters.
Here.
Pelosa.
Here.
Warwick.
Here.
Winfield.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have all 10 members present.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So we'll go back to adoption of the minutes. Any errors or omissions? I should have asked that first. Seeing none, I think Ralph has indicated he'd move the minutes be adopted.
I'll second it, Herbert.
Seconds, call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
On the motion, Krebitz.
Yes.
Giguere.
Yes.
Harvey.
Here. Yes.
Herbert.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Peters.
Yes.
Pelosa.
Yes.
Warwick.
Yes.
Winfield.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Okay, we'll move down to minutes, matters arising. The first one is review report, and I believe Betsy is probably handling this one.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just some of the social media posts since our last meeting. So we've been advertising our summer job postings as well as highlighting some of the wetland work that we completed in the past year.
Any questions for Betsy on the report? Seeing no questions, we'll move to the next report on watershed conditions. I believe Jen's doing this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been a relatively quiet February, which is nice, just nice and cold. We've had some ice formation out on the Lake Erie, which is different from last year. There was no ice, basically. Updated the shoreline watershed conditions statement to maintain that, and completed the snow survey on February 1st.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Any questions for Jen? Seeing none, we'll move to item C, a proclamation of provisions under the Conservation Authorities Act. I think Elizabeth's doing this one.
Mr. Chair, so some specific provisions of the Conservation Authorities Act were proclaimed on February 2nd. I forwarded this out in the advance package. Most of these provisions have to do with some elements of governance as well as government requirements and minister powers. If I can just go to the next slide. It included a frequently asked question sheet as well, which was helpful. The remaining unproclaimed provisions will be reclaimed in two stages over the coming months, and those will include provisions on the mandatory programs and services, as well as provisions relative to our municipal levies. Next slide. I think the important thing right now, I have a meeting with Conservation Ontario and the other GMs later this afternoon to discuss the provisions that have come into play. But I think the frequently asked questions answered some of the immediate questions on these provisions. And that was, do we immediately have to appoint new members to meet the 70% requirement? And the province has initially made it clear that we don't have to do any immediate action right now on that element. And we don't have to do any immediate action on the limits of chair and vice chair, although that really doesn't apply to our authority. We already had our elections and a new chair and vice chair have been elected from different municipalities than what has been in the previous years. So right now, in terms of our municipal publicly appointed representatives, we're not doing any changes with that. We'll continue as status quo. But moving forward, we'll have to have conversations with each individual municipality as to their appointments in the future to the board. I'll bring more information on these provisions after I've had a chance to speak with both Conservation Ontario and getting further direction from ministry staff, and we'll report back. But right now, there's no immediate action that we need to take in regards to these provisions.
Any questions for Jennifer? Or Elizabeth, I'm sorry. Seeing no questions, we'll move on to the next report, conservation area update. I believe Elizabeth is handling this one as well.
Actually, I'm going to pass it to Joe for this one.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few things to update with regard to conservation areas. Field staff have been taking advantage of the stay-at-home order to work on some administrative processes on how the campgrounds will be operated this year so that we can seamlessly transition between the different stages that we may be in for COVID-19, as well as looking at how our seasonal staff interviews and orientation and training will look this year, trying to utilize more virtual training when possible. But a couple things we wanted to bring to your attention. You may recall back in November when we approved the seasonal camping application, we did create this document, COVID-19 impact guideline, to clearly outline to our seasonal campers at that time what camping during the COVID-19 restrictions may look like next year or this camping season in order for them to make an informed decision in terms of coming back. When this was developed back in October, we created 3 stages. It was just before the province came out with their 5-stage reopening framework. We've been looking at these and we're confident that we're still in line with the provincial framework. Our 3 stages, primarily stage 1 is consistent with the gray lockdown, which in that case, we'd only be opening to seasonals with amenities closed. Our stage 2 is in line with kind of the red and yellow or red and orange of the provincial framework, where we have some higher restrictions. And then stage 3 moving more into the yellow and green stages of the province. The one thing we wanted to clearly identify, and if I could get the next slide, please. One thing we looked at for capacity, last season, we operated at roughly a 50% capacity with a guideline recommending every other site being closed for transient camping. So that's how we kind of set up the stages coming into this season. And the budget that we established was looking more at an 80% capacity. When we look at all the associated regulations that are active today with the provincial framework, and also we consulted with the health units, there are no reduced capacity restrictions right now for campgrounds. The advice we're getting is we can operate at whatever capacity we're comfortable with, as long as we're meeting the COVID-19 restrictions for increased cleaning, disinfecting, social gathering, etc. So we just wanted to let the board know that it's our intentions this year that we do want to try and operate at near capacity for the entire camping season, as long as we're not in a stage 1 lockdown. So as long as I think there are still sites in the campgrounds that we're going to have to keep closed just for the essence of they're close together or they may have shared services that the restrictions would be difficult to meet. But for the most part, we want to continue to operate at near capacity for all the campsites being available in the park. The other noted change is last year we didn't open our swimming pools, and at one point the playgrounds were closed due to the provincial order. We do have a report later on tonight's agenda where we're confident that we have a plan and a proposal whereby the swimming pool should be able to be open for their normal operating this season this year, as long as we're meeting those strict restrictions. Obviously, swimming pools are a high demand amenity in our park, and we'd like to have those open for the users that are coming in. So those are some changes that we're looking at making in terms of capacity and operations in our parks this year, based on the provincial frameworks, the stages that are available. And the only other quick thing I wanted to note is the field staff have continued to monitor and do property checks over the winter months. Typically, all our properties are closed during the winter as we do not perform winter maintenance, except for Dan Patterson Conservation Area, which is more suitable for cross-country skiing activities. So we do have that permitted. We do recognize the need for exercise, mental, physical health during the pandemic. So we are aware of users hiking the trails. We haven't seen a significant increase from what we're used to seeing out there. But we are reporting some increased activity on Lake Margaret that's been a concern to staff. So we have subsequently posted signs in the park recognizing that the lake is closed and there aren't any activities permitted to be occurring on the lake during this time. And since then, we have seen some positive response. It is helping, but staff continue to monitor and check on that. And then finally, recognizing the stay-at-home orders are looking like they'll be lifted next Tuesday. Staff are starting to develop a plan to get back out on our trails and finish our hazard tree inspection and abatement, so we can get that completed prior to ramping up for the operating season. That's all I have to report at this time.
Sorry, Joe misspoke. It's Lake Whitaker where the signs went up, not Lake Margaret.
I was wondering that. I said, when did we take that over?
My apologies. Certainly, there's been lots of discussions with both lakes, and yes, Lake Whitaker is the lake that I'm referring to in our conservation areas. We have no jurisdiction on Lake Margaret.
Yeah,
you can have it if you want it.
Any questions for Joe? See no questions. We have a recommendation to receive the reports.
I'll move it, Herbert.
Seconder,
Warwick,
Warwick seconds. Call the vote, please. Elizabeth?
On the motion, Kravitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes,
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
and the motion passes.
Thank you. We'll move down to correspondence. I guess the first two, A and B, are fairly self-explanatory. Did you want to comment on item C, Elizabeth or Joe? Do you think?
No, I think those items all were just for information, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Need a motion to receive the correspondence?
Pelosa,
Harvey.
Call the vote, please. Elizabeth?
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
yes,
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll move down to statement of revenue and expenses. I think the first reports from Elizabeth or Kathleen or both.
Yep, Mr. Chair, the audit was conducted during the week of January 25th to 29th. Those draft audited statements were posted in the advanced package with a positive year-end position of about 108,123. That was mainly as a result of the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy that we received. Those funds have been retransferred to the reserve to ensure that our staffing levels can be maintained throughout 2021, despite possible revenue losses or disruptions due to the pandemic. Scott Trevors and Jim Frederick from Graham Scott Ends are joining us on the line this morning, and we'll take you through those draft statements. So with that, I will pass it over, I believe, to Scott.
That is correct. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here so I can show you the statements here. Start with that. Everybody see the financial statements?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Okay. Okay, well, good morning. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Trevors. I am a manager at Graham Scott Inns in St. Thomas, and also on the line is noted was Jim Frederick, and he's a partner at Graham Scott Inns. So we are the auditors of the authority and have been for the last number of years. I'm just going to scroll down here. We're going to skip over all the title pages and the table of contents. I'm going to get right into the auditor's report here. So this is guess what our services provide. This is the assurance report. So in the assurance world, auditing, there are two kinds of reports. There's a qualified opinion to say there's no issue, or there are material issues, and then there's an unqualified opinion, which is say there are no issues and the statements are free from material misstatement. So as is every year, this one here would be an unqualified report. So I will read you the audit opinion that we have this year. We have audited the financial statements of Kettle Creek Conservation Authority, which comprise the statement of financial position as at December 31st, 2020, and the statement of operations and accumulated surplus, statement of changes in net assets, and statements of cash flows for the year then ended, and the notes to the financial statements, including a summary of significant accounting policies. In our opinion, the organization's financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the financial position of the organization as at December 31st, 2020, and the results of its operations and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So that is our unqualified opinion on these financial statements. So the rest of the auditor's report, it kind of outlines, got different sections, but outlines how we form our opinion, which is based on the Canadian auditing standards. The next subsection is the responsibilities of management and those charged with governance, which is the board, saying that they are responsible for these financial statements. They've given us the information, they've prepared them, and it's up to the organization to evaluate their own internal controls and things like that. The next part is the auditor's responsibility. So ours is, outlines again that they're free from material misstatement. That's our goal of the audit, is to prove that they're free from material misstatement, and then kind of outlines on the next page, high leveling what an audit is. I'm gonna give you 4 or 5 bullet points there. And then at the very bottom is kind of the date that these would be approved, which would be February 24th, 2021, which is the date of the AGM. So if you take anything out of this auditor's report, I guess it would be the unqualified opinion at the top, which kind of, again, it says that these statements are free from material misstatements. So I was just going to say this report as well it's a standard communication across Canada. I guess at any audit, big or small, you'd have similar wording other than the dates and the names of the organization if it was an unqualified report. Okay. So we're going to keep scrolling down here, and we're going to just kind of go over the financial statements at a high level here. It should be noted too, before we get into these financial statements, that there's no changes were made to the figures presented by management during our audit. So we propose no adjustments or no journal entries or no additional items that we felt needed to be changed from the figures that were presented by management. Okay, so here we have our statement of financial position, which is our assets and liabilities as at a certain date, which is December 31st, 2020. It's broken down into financial assets, financial liabilities, and then non-financial assets. So financial assets being our cash, our short-term investments, and our receivables. Anything we can convert into cash or our cash are presented at the top. So that's a total of 1.5 million, up from 1.2 million the year before. The liabilities, so what we owe money for, whether it's normal trade payables and accruals or our deferred revenues, which include things like unspent programming money, campground deposits, and deferred capital deposits. Okay. And then the non-financial assets at the bottom. So that's our things that aren't cash. So they're tangible capital assets and prepaid inventories. So not much in prepaid inventories. Tangible capital assets are $3 million, which is consistent with the prior year. So we add assets every year, and we also amortize those assets based on kind of a systematic rationale of matching the usage of the assets against the earnings. Okay, so accumulated surplus 3.897 million, up from 3.78 million. Okay. And we have our next page here, the statement of operations and accumulated surplus. So revenues and expenditures for the year ended December 31st, 2020. So you can see our total revenues of 2.1 million compared to 2.3 million the year before. So if you're to look at that, you'd see the two that jump out are the user fees and sales, which dropped, 350,000 or so, and that's mainly our campgrounds. And then the increase in the federal grants from 86,000 to 255,000, which is mainly due to the wage subsidy that we received, about 164,000 or so. Okay. So total revenues 2.1 compared to 2.3 the year before. So the expenditures as well, down from 2.3 million to 2 million. So these are broken down by segment or program. So kind of what areas we operate in. So you can see the two campgrounds, Lake Whitaker and Dalewood, both dropped from the prior year, but all the other expenditures for maintaining the authority were pretty consistent with the year before, which gets us down to the surplus that Elizabeth quoted of 108,000 compared to 38,000 the year before. Okay, for a year-end surplus of the 3.8 million. Next page is our statement of changes in financial assets. So it's a requirement under the accounting standards that we have this. It just kind of shows kind of how our financial assets changed, which is assets minus liabilities, by backing out all the non-financial asset transactions, which are things to do with capital assets. So you can see that our net financial assets, which is assets less liabilities, went up $68,000. Our statement of cash flows, it's kind of where we spent our money, where we received our money in the year. So it's broken down into a couple different sections as well. So the first part is our operating activities, and then capital and financing. So you can see from our operating activities about halfway down, we 353,000 was our cash flows from operations, of which we spent $164,000 on capital assets, and we received $75,000 of capital funding specific for those capital assets. So our cash went up 264,000. Okay. And we're into the notes to the financial statements. So this is where we kind of sort of outlines kind of what the accounting policies are and how we report our transactions throughout the year. So there's no changes in these accounting policies. Every once in a while we have to update these if there's changes in their standards or anything like that. And there hasn't been any for 2020. So all these accounting policies would be identical for the last few years. So it talks about how we estimate, maybe some estimates in the statements, how we recognize our revenues, more of the revenues, how we set up our reserves. We do have some, non-financial assets and contributed capital assets, potentially. How we amortize our tangible capital assets, right? And we have no, or how we report government transfers. Now we have no contaminated sites on our properties. Okay. Again, no changes in those accounting policies year over year. And some other notes here, either to expand on other areas of the financial statements that are on the balance sheet or the financial position in the statement of operations, or just to provide us with additional disclosures required to under the accounting standards. So we outline where our municipal levies came from. There's note 2. Note 3 shows we have to show what whatever we invested in, and kind of where our cash sits. Note 4 is our credit facility. So it kind of shows what we have as overdraft. Not that we've used any, but just that it's there if we needed it. We have to disclose what we pay in employee future benefits, which in this particular case is our OMERS pension plan. Note 6 is our budgeted note. So we need to reconcile, I guess, the budget that's prepared by the organization to the PSAB, or the accounting standards presentation on the financial statement. So it's to back out things that aren't necessarily considered revenue and expenditures for accounting purposes, like your transfers to and from reserves. Those are internal transfers and not current period revenue or expenditures. Okay. Note 7, sometimes we act on donated services. We need to disclose that. there's that deferred revenue breakdown, which talks about, there's our stewardship, so program 226,000, our campground deposits 187,000, and then capital funding, so item or funds that have been spent on capital assets for the year, or for the cumulative balance, 182,000. Note 9 is our accumulated surplus and reserves. So every year we have that surplus from the operations, which was 108,000, and we allocate that to different reserves, so we can spend on or use them for future purposes. Okay, you can see we have 1,034,000 in reserves. Okay. Note 10 is we outline a little bit of the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy that we received. So that's that 164,000 that helps support operations in the year. Okay, so that's just a difference, or something different from last year that we need to expand upon in the notes, and where some of our funding came from. Note 11 is how we break down the expenditures by object. Okay, so in the financial state or the statement of operations, those expenditures are by program. So this kind of breaks those programs down and says what we spent on materials, wages, and amortization. 12 is a related party. So we do have the environmental trust. We consider a related party. Note 13 is our significant event notice, which talks about the pandemic impact. Obviously not significant at this time on Kittle Creek, but we do like to put that in there. That is a potential risk that is out there for any organization. Okay, and after the accounting policies and all the accounting notes, there's a whole bunch of different schedules that kind of break down further detail, I guess, of those expenditures and our tangible capital assets. I won't go over those, but those just kind of gives a little more detail into the totals that are on the financial statements if you wanted to peruse through those. Okay. So that is the financial statements that I have prepared, or I guess that you guys have prepared, and we've done the auditor's report on. So is there any questions on those?
Questions for Scott? Doesn't look like it.
Okay. Got a couple other pieces of information here. You guys had the audit findings letter?
It was in the advance package, yes.
Okay, yeah, so that's a requirement as well. I don't have it here to pull up at this time, but that's just a required communication that we get out there to communicate any audit findings with those charged with governance, or whether there was any changes in accounting practices or policies, or whether there's any differences or misstatements or deficiencies in internal control. So it's just a letter to summarize kind of our findings. So there was no issues really to communicate on that. That's just kind of the conclusion of that letter. That's probably about 2 or 3 pages, but we asked that the board review that and sign that that letter as well, just to know that we've communicated that with you. Okay. And I believe there's also a page that we asked the board chair to sign to approve the financial statements. So when we're at the AGM, we can have that approval in the statements. So the signed financial position. And I believe that was also in the package, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So Mr. Chair, if there aren't any questions for Jim and Scott, I would like to thank them. It was, again, another unusual element to do the audit electronically this year and not in person, but we persevered and we did it. And Scott and Jim are always really good at our tight timeline to get things done for this meeting. So it's appreciated. And with that, I'd like a motion. You do realize you'll be accepting the audit as part of our next meeting at the AGM, but at this time I'd like permission that the chair execute the audit planning and finding letters and provide signatures on those at this time.
Harvey?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Didn't catch who that was.
That was Steve.
And
Steve?
Dennis.
Okay, seconder,
Kravitz?
Kravitz. Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, I'll ask Elizabeth to call the vote.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Giguere,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Grant.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Scott and Jim. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to new business. First, reports on the Dalewood Dam Stop Log Lifter project. Elizabeth and Jen, I'm not sure who's taking it, but
Mr. Chair, I can take it if there's any questions. Jen's available. The stop log and stop log lifter was a project that we were undertaking in 2020 with the assistance of WECI funding. We ran into some hiccups with this project. Mainly, we found out late in 2020 that we could not secure the wooden logs that we had hoped to use for this project. The length of the logs and the material the logs needed to be was a complicating factor and couldn't be secured through any suppliers. And that was confirmed both by the company that we were using to conduct the work, as well as background by staff as well. So late in the year, we had to look at a redesign of the project in terms of securing steel logs to do this. In the end, the steel logs are a better option for this project in two ways. Steel logs will have a longer life. And as well, if you recall at the last meeting, we were discussing the freeboard of the dam and looking at having to raise the embankments to meet that freeboard. If we have an operational logs and log lifters that we can raise and lower at different storm events, then the necessity to meet that IDF or freeboard during a storm lessens, and then we wouldn't have the costs of adding height to those embankments. So staff gave the engineer to kind of look at a redesign of the project. He has engineered steel logs that we can lower and lift in different storm conditions, although ultimately that increased the cost of the project. We realized that in January that the cost of the project was increasing about $20,000 because of that. Mainly because the cost of the steel logs, we had to add screw jacks to be able to lift and lower the logs during certain rain events. And then the price of steel increased about 30% over mid-January to late January. To add pressure to this project, we were able to secure some redirected funds from WECI, so an additional $6,000. But all of those funds needed to be spent by March 15th, or the project completed by March 15th. Based on the timelines of this meeting, we reached out to the chair and vice chair, reviewed the aspects of the over expenditures, and that we had received some extra WECI funding, and the chair and vice chair gave staff approval to proceed based on the updated quote. Those updated numbers have been added. We squared away money from 2020 from the capital expenditures and have earmarked those funds for 2021. So there's no impact to the planned expenditures in 2021. Other than just this added $20,000. So all of this is accounted for in the updated 2021 budget. We're just updating members that we did have to proceed with that project based on our timelines. But overall, I think we're ending up with a better end project and a better project overall for the dam and the operation of the dam moving forward.
thank you, Elizabeth. Any questions, concerns? something I normally don't take much pleasure in approving something on behalf of everybody else. I think in this case it was warranted.
Well, if I can, Grant, I just
Go
think
ahead.
at the end of the day, the metal is going to be much better than the wood anyway. It's going to last. I mean, if we had a choice, probably we would have gone that way. So I think the choice was made for us. So thank you.
I would tend to agree with you, Allison. I think it's a good update.
Any other questions? If not, we have a recommendation that staff prepare applications for the water and erosion control infrastructure program for concrete repairs to the Railroad Dam, and second application for embankment maintenance. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong recommendation. Sorry about that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if you wanted to do, the board members could receive this report.
Receive that, okay. Motion to receive.
Rosa,
Harvey,
Can you call the vote, please, Elizabeth?
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
yes.
Harvey,
yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
and Jones.
Yes.
That motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, just before you go to the next item, Elizabeth made me aware earlier on in the meeting that she does have to leave shortly, so she may leave the meeting for prior commitments.
Okay, yep, no problem. Okay, next items, draft budget update.
Mr. Chair, the updated draft budget was put out in the advanced packages. Since circulating it to members as well as making member municipalities aware of the budget, I have received no questions or concerns from members or member municipalities on the draft budget. The budget that was out in the February 10th package did include some small adjustments made to the earlier version that was put out in January. There was one additional seasonal tree planter added using reserve funds. Staff do expect to do an increased amount of hand planting, which requires more staff. So this will cover that off using reserve funds. Capital budget expenditures were also updated in this draft, one to reflect that stop log lifter project and other unfinished projects from 2020 relative to the Evans Sister projects. And again, those Evans Sister projects are 100% funded, so there's no impact to the budget for those as well. And there are some small adjustments made just based on comparisons of the 2020 actuals, which were included in this draft. Overall, the operating reserve drawdown is expected to be around $239,000. The majority of that is relative to wage support for the campgrounds, and the capital expenditures of $231,683. Again, a large portion of those expenditures are fully funded by the Evans Sisters project. So the budget, again, is draft for your information and further query, but it will be presented for final consideration at the annual general meeting on February 24th. And I'm certainly willing to entertain any questions from the board members on that draft at this time.
Questions for Elizabeth? Seeing no question, you motion to receive?
I don't think it's necessary at this
Okay.
time. You'll consider it fully at that annual general meeting.
Okay. So if there's no questions, we'll move on to item C, wiki submission, Railroad Dam. And I think Jen is taking this one possibly.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we're going, projects for the Dalewood Dam. So another potential WECI submission for the 2021-2022 intake. We're with the completion of the geotechnical investigation project in 2020, there were some recommendations or options provided to increase the freeboard of the embankments, as well as 2 recommendations for best management practices. One is vegetation removal of mature trees and brush on the downstream faces of the north and south embankments, as well as concrete repairs to the structure itself that were identified in the high-level visual inspection completed as part of the geotechnical report. With the completion early this year of the new lifter and stop logs, for the anticipated completion of that project, that allows the dam to pass the IDF, as we mentioned previously, which means that we'll be able to lift the logs, and that way we won't have to necessarily worry about the freeboard. Consequently, we're looking at potentially using that available budget to be redirected to completing those best management recommendations, including the tree removal and the repairs to the wing walls. As you can see in the photos, there's an example of some of the spalling and delamination that's occurring on those wing walls, and that's a repair that, if it's done now, will reduce the chance of having more expensive repairs in the future. These are projects that are able to be completed through with WECI funding, which is 50% funding, and we're asking the board to support 2 applications to the WECI program for those projects.
Thank you, Jen. Any questions for Jennifer? So you have the recommendation before you, mover and a second. Oh, Ralph, do you have a question?
I would move that recommendation be put forward.
Okay,
Peters,
Peter seconds. Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jaguar,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Pelosa. Sorry, Pelosa left the meeting. Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
and Jones.
Yes,
And the motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Next report is the pool operation for a Class B pool. Joe, I think you're doing this one.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in prior discussions on the draft budget, we identified to the members that staff were exploring making a change to how we operate our swimming pools and our campgrounds for the 2021 camping season. Our pools are governed by an Ontario regulation for public pools, where they do differentiate between classifications. So for example, Class A and Class B. Campgrounds are recognized as Class B facilities. The main difference between a Class B and a Class A is that Class A requires lifeguards to be guarding the pool. In Class B, lifeguards are not required as long as we're meeting the regulation restrictions. Historically, we've always operated as a Class A. We've always had lifeguards present at the pools just for a higher protection of our clientele, as well as due to the demand and the capacity that we see in our pools. Over the years, we have had some challenges in hiring trained certified lifeguards to staff the pools for the entire summer. And as well, recognizing the current COVID-19 restrictions, we didn't open our pools last season. So what we are looking at doing is trying to see the possibility of operating our pools under a Class B this year and not having lifeguards present. We have reached out to both health units and our insurance provider. Just for note, the Lake Whitaker swimming pool falls under the Middlesex London Health Unit, and the St. Dalewood pool falls under the Southwestern Public Health. So we did reach out to both health units as well as our insurance provider. We didn't receive any kind of negative responses. Everyone was fine with making that change as long as we meet the regulation requirements. We've also considered this change due to the COVID-19 restrictions that are currently in place, and we understand there may be further guidelines put out before our pools open. But ultimately, with social gathering restrictions, I think it would be onerous to continue to find lifeguards this year to operate under a Class A. Under a Class B pool, the maximum bather capacity is 10. and anybody under the age of 12 has to be accompanied by an adult. We are, based on some research we've done on some campground swimming pools that opened last year and that are planning to open this year, many of them did it through a reservation system. So campers would have to reserve a swim time, and that way we can provide a fair opportunity for all of our campers to swim. By having a reservation system, we can verify we're meeting the Class B requirements, that our users are registered guests, and as well provides us the opportunity to provide information in terms of contract tracing if needed by the health unit. We've also confirmed that our current facilities are set up to meet any other guidelines that are existing, such as having entrance gates and exit gates and having them funnel through different gate entrances. So based on all that information, we are confident that we can move forward with Class B, meet the health unit requirements. We do intend to still operate at a higher standard. So although we don't have lifeguards present, we are proposing to have the pools staffed. So regular crew members will be there so that they can make sure there's a smooth transition between reservations. They can collect reservations. They'll be responsible for pool maintenance, taking the water quality testings that are required, as well as just generally enforcing pool rules. So based on the information we've collected, staff is recommending that we move forward with operating both swimming pools under a Class B designation for the 2021 camping season.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions for Joe?
One question, Joe, we had always operated as Class A previously. This will be the first time we're switching to B.
That is correct. We've always had lifeguards prior under a Class A. This will be the first time that we operate under a Class B facility.
Bill, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Joe, maybe you mentioned it, maybe I just missed it. Would you have to hire extra staff to monitor the pools in the two areas, or would you spread those duties out amongst the existing staff?
Having the existing staff monitoring the pool has been considered in the current budget in the staff complement that we hiring this year. We have made some changes to be able to accommodate some additional staff, but held within the normal hours that we offer to staff. The other reason is we also have some watercraft rental trailer this year as part of the Evans Water Trail that we've also added some additional staff to it so that we can manage those reservations. I think the ideal thing with having crew members do it is we don't have to have a handful of specialized staff. We can train all staff in the requirements to work at the pool. So we can kind of shift through and assign staff where necessary to that. So it is some additional staff, but confined within the normal operating budget that's being considered.
Yeah, I think that's a great. I'd like to move that motion, please.
Okay. Any seconder?
I'll second it, but I do have a question.
Go ahead.
In the report, it says there's a maximum capacity of 25% of normal. What is considered normal?
Thank you, Dennis. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the current capacity of our pools under a Class A is dependent on the size. So the size of our pools, I believe it's around 50, like 50, I think it's 54 at Whitaker and maybe just under 50 at Dalewood. Last year, the guidelines that came out from the province recommend operating at 25% capacity, which would bring us down probably around 15 or so, between 15 and 20. But under a Class B, it would be capped at 10. Now, 10 is kind of consistent with what prior social gathering restrictions have been recommended by the province under their red and orange restrictions, but it'd be 10 under Class B and just slightly higher at 25% capacity under if we had lifeguards.
Okay, just what? All right, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Jim.
Good, thank you very much. Just a curiosity question. In the past, when you have designated lifeguards, do they always wear red shirts that have big words lifeguard on? Because if you're going to have extra staff watch, will people think that they're lifeguards? Or is there some way of designating them not as being actual lifeguards?
Right. Thank you, Jim. Yes, under Class A, when we have lifeguards, there's requirements that they have to be clearly identified. So they are wearing shirts that say lifeguards.
Okay.
Under the Class B, our pool attendants would be more operating it from the gate, not necessarily within the pool area monitoring as a lifeguard would. They would not be wearing lifeguard identified shirts. And as well, under Class B, we have required signage that has to be posted, so it's clearly recognized that there are no lifeguards present.
That was my second question. Do you post signs? All right, thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing no questions, I'll call the vote, please.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
and Jones.
Yes,
That motion passes, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Next item under E is February Planning Regulations Report. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the advanced package was a report of planning approvals that have been issued by staff as well as Section 28 permits since the last meeting. Staff's just looking for receipt of that information, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Questions for Joe? Seeing no questions, we have a recommendation to receive the report.
Harvey.
Herbert.
Herbert seconds. Call the vote, please, Elizabeth.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Closa is absent, Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
That motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, need a motion to go into closed session for closed session meetings, minutes, and for property matter, property acquisition. Need a mover and a seconder.
Warwick?
Mackey.
Call the vote, please.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes. Does, do we need a 5-minute break or everybody ready to continue on?
If we can just have a 5-minute break, Mr. Chair, to end the recording and
Sure.
start the closed session. Okay, Mr. Chair, we have a motion to accept the minutes from December.
Mover and seconder?
Harvey.
Mackey.
Mackey seconds. Can call the vote.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Harvey. Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair. And the final motion coming out of closed session is that staff proceed as directed on a potential land donation.
So moved.
Warwick moves, seconder.
Harvey. Peters.
Harvey, call the vote, please.
Kravitz,
Here, I mean, yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Oh, yeah.
Herbert,
Yes.
Mackey.
Yep.
Peters,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Glad you showed up for the end, Jim. I think that's the end of the meeting. Elizabeth, unless there's something else you need to add?
No, nothing. Our next meeting is February 24th for the AGM.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
So move.
Winfield, seconder, Harvey. You call the vote?
I'm assuming all is in favor. Can I assume
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, have a
Thank
good
you.
day, everybody.